Ah, welcome. I'm so glad you could join us. Please come in. Your presence honors us. Here at the Mr. Homemaker podcast, we share our stories and challenges, collect the best expert advice, and offer one another support as we learn to manage our households. Your perspective and contributions will be very valuable. And just in time, today's discussion is about to begin. It is my pleasure to present Mr. Homemaker.
Thank you for joining me for this discussion of the purpose of marriage. Last week, we discussed the purpose of family. If you haven't already, go back and watch or listen to that for the foundational concepts upon which we will build in this episode. As a refresher, we ended last episode with a working model of a well-functioning family as a group of people who share emotional, material, and financial resources in order to provide for the flourishing of their members by helping them to progress through Maslow's hierarchy of needs that ultimately achieves self-actualization. We added that the family simultaneously contributes to the well-being of neighboring families, their community, society at large, and future families. Upon this foundation, let's now build a working model of a well-functioning marriage that contributes to both the proper functioning of the family as a whole and flourishing of the individuals in the marriage themselves. For the moment, let's set aside the physiological and safety needs at the base of Maslow's hierarchy and begin in the middle of that hierarchy, where most people intuitively go when they think about the institution of marriage: love and belonging. In modern discourse, we associate marriage with romantic love, but classical philosophy distinguishes 6 kinds of love relevant to our discussion today, romantic love being just one kind. The Greek word is Eros, for romantic or passionate sexual love. The second kind is playful, uncommitted love, which entails fun and or conquest, but without any strings or commitment attached. The third is friendship, which entails the mutual goodwill between two people, based either in mutual utility, mutual pleasure, or mutual admiration, based in recognition of one another's goodness, their rationality, and their virtue. Now, these are not mutually exclusive, and any one of these types of love may blend into or grow into another. The fourth is familial love, which is much like friendship, but rooted in long-standing dependency, familiarity, and core identity shared between people rather than the particular qualities of their character. The fifth is called practical love and is founded on reason, a shared sense of duty, or long-term mutual interests. And the final for today's discussion is universal love, the kind of love we give to strangers or mankind. It is unselfish and altruistic, but very generalized. While love of one or more of these varieties may be an important ingredient to a healthy, well-functioning marriage, the defining feature is commitment, both moral and social, as well as legal. Now, the practical reason or reasons that people commit to marriage beyond the mere feelings of affection that may be rooted in one or more of those types of love is that a marriage is a form of contract. And like any contract, it is two parties who wish to undertake a mutual endeavor. And each of them knows that they benefit by the other committing to the endeavor, and in the moment feels that that arrangement is in their own best interests. But people also know of themselves and of others that humans are fickle creatures, and that oftentimes fleeting desires or whims or distractions may distract us or derail us from pursuing the ultimate goal that we set out toward in the beginning. So that kind of commitment benefits the parties in two ways. First, insofar as the marriage is a vehicle for the two people helping each other achieve self-actualization, becoming the best version of themselves. Both people, if they're thinking about it, are aware that that is going to be a difficult journey at any given time, both for the person who is coaching and for the person being coached. The process of self-improvement or mutual accountability and mutual improvement is a difficult, uncomfortable, and sometimes off-putting process. Like having a trainer at the gym, having somebody who's going to make you show up and complete the exercises that you set out to do may make the difference between achieving your fitness goals versus going home and going back to bed. The mutual commitment to stay together enables both people to feel more comfortable accepting the responsibilities associated with bringing children into the world and raising them, because both parties have the confidence that the other person will continue to contribute emotional, financial, material resources to the well-being of those children. Along those same lines, one of the other essential elements of a well-functioning marriage is it's not only a commitment, but it is an exclusive commitment. And that exclusivity, the particular aspect that is essential to it, is sexual exclusivity. This ensures for the man in the marriage that the children brought into the world and raised in that family are his children. The sexual exclusivity in the marriage is what gives him that assurance. And similarly, the woman gains the security of knowing that the man is committed to her as the exclusive source of his sexual desire. Exclusivity, commitment, mutual enrichment, and joint endeavor to bring up and raise children and foster a well-functioning family are all elements of a well-functioning marriage. To explore these issues further, I am joined today by my lovely wife, Kristen. Thank you for being here, Kristen.
I'm happy to be here, Marcus.
How would you like to begin? What are your initial impressions based on that set of vocabulary terms and concepts by which I hope that through this discussion we can cobble together a shared understanding of what a healthy marriage is?
So,
asking for a friend.
Yeah, we've had a week. So when you talk about the 6 types of love, are you saying that a marriage comprises all of those?
No.
Okay.
Good question, though. Yeah, no, I think that we, in our modern Western affluent society, place a premium on romantic love.
Yeah.
I think there's many reasons to be skeptical or at least apprehensive about whether or not that is the best or a sufficient foundation for marriage. Particularly because I think it's more fleeting than other kinds of love.
So tell me more about what you think the real foundation of the foundational love of marriage should be.
Yeah, so let's go into
Like, are you more focused on the contractual kind of commitment piece of marriage?
Okay, here we go. I found my cheat sheet. Okay. Here's what it is. We think marriage, we think romance. Mm-hmm. Right? You think romance. However, there's something like even more frivolous that I think, frankly, many people mix up with romantic love, which is like passionate, or I'm sorry, is like the playful but uncommitted love. It's essentially like promiscuity being confused as romance.
Yeah.
Like even, like like romantic love in a like a Victorian kind of sense is passionate, but is tied up with this idea of like, oh, well, like it's passionately working its way toward marriage, as opposed to like people are passionately hooking up and then like swiping right, or whatever, swiping left, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like, and so I think people have like conflated love with romantic love, and then conflated romantic love with like hooking up with people.
Well, I wouldn't go so
and
far.
Then like stumbled into like, oh, hey, well, like I'm just like, so whoever I hook up with and feel comfortable hooking up with more than once, that's the person I marry.
I think that's going a little too far. I know that you have some perceptions of like
hookup culture.
Yes, hookup culture, which we're going to get to. Also, you promised we wouldn't talk about sex on this podcast, and then immediately we started talking about it. So
we wouldn't talk about having sex.
Okay. So a couple of things. One, you talked about the kind of confluence of that playful, uncommitted love. I don't think people think that is the basis of marriage, but I think that people worry that their relationships are not the one when they start to lose that. And so one of the things that immediately came to mind was, I wonder, like, if we talked to enough divorced people who then got remarried and then they were remarried for 10 to 20 years.
Yeah.
Do those people feel like, oh yeah, no, that first marriage was bad and I have found it with this one and I've got this like never ending spark or this, right? Whatever it is. And it might be hard to accurately assess that, because the likelihood is like you went through some of the more trying times with the first partner, right? Because you're like newly married, financially probably not super stable because you're like earlier in your career, just having kids. It's like all the hard stuff in my mind in the beginning. And so maybe like by nature, like if you're 50 and you remarry, like, yeah, that person seems great because like you're not having to go through all the tough negotiation of like, raising children and all that.
Well, and that's how you hear about like divorcees always complaining like, oh, they're getting to benefit from all the hard work I put into fixing them.
Right. But so I do wonder like either like one, are people learning from those mistakes and that unrealistic point of view and then being happier in their second marriage because they're more content to be like, oh, I guess like that butterflies feeling isn't always there? Or do they find that with some other person and like, we're the chumps that are like in our, that aren't like searching for that?
Well, what do you think the answer to that is?
Well, I think I just kind of answered it, which I think is like a lot of the hard stuff happens the first time around, and it's easy to step back and say, this isn't working for me, and step away if you don't have the commitment piece of marriage, of that kind of, the moral and legal, familial obligation to someone. But if I kind of feel like there might not be a fair comparison there, but I'm just interested to know, like,
It would be an interesting sort of survey to conduct.
Right.
You're always full of good ideas for like data we should have that we don't.
It's true.
Yeah.
Well, because I always joke, I'm like, I feel like you would like, the, forever part of marriage.
Yeah.
is no joke to you. Like, you're not like forever until I feel like it's not forever.
Right.
So I've jokingly said to you, like, I think you would literally just be completely miserable with me because you will not get divorced. Like you would rather.
No, well, first of all, you're delightful, so that's impossible.
It's true.
But the other thing is, I mean, I've also alluded to, like, I think both ways can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I think if you have the mindset of, well, if things get too tough, then I'll leave.
Right.
Well, then, like, things will get tough enough that you will leave. Like, you will find that moment will present itself.
Right.
But if you have the opposite mindset of leaving is not an option, the only options are be miserable or work really hard at not being miserable, then once you've taken the leaving off the table, but working really hard to make yourself not miserable is much more appealing.
Yeah.
Because your only other option is be miserable.
It's true.
So.
Well, it's interesting because we've talked before, and I have, again, kind of jokingly, not jokingly said to you that I am all on board for our 100% commitment to our marriage unless you harm our children or you cheat on me.
You never used to say the harm the children thing.
Well, because as I was thinking through it, I was like, well, that's another thing that would be a deal breaker. Like, I'd be like, I'm out of here. But I think that then, like, as we talked about last week or last session.
Yeah. I'm so used to saying week, but it's not week anymore.
I just pretend now it's been a week. No, but as we said there, right, like, part of it, like, properly functioning family, like, it has to provide for the physical safety and well-being.
Yeah.
And so if you break that, you kind of break the contract of the marriage.
Yeah.
But I've also said that for me, cheating is like we would be done.
Right.
And you don't agree with that. Talk more about that.
Yeah, no, again, I just don't think that I think it's a problem. I think it would be a problem if you cheated on me. Let me be very clear. I'm against you cheating on me.
Okay.
I also am not planning on cheating on you, so I'm not encouraging that. But yeah, I just don't think I can't think of any reason. I can't think of any benefit to saying, well, here's my list of deal breakers. Like, all the deal breakers are on the front end of, like, here's reasons we shouldn't get married. And if you work your way through that list, and you're like, okay, there's no reason not to get married. Then you say, let's do this. Let's get married. Like, well, all the deal breakers you've passed all those points. And then the marriage thing just carries you through to death. There's no like exit ramp off the marriage highway.
Yeah. Interestingly, I actually just watched an interview the other day with a woman. I think she has it's one of the top 5 most watched TED Talks ever. And it's called, like, Rethinking Infidelity. And it's by this woman, I think her name is Esther Perel, Perel. And basically her whole thing, like, she's written books about this, but her basic premise is, it is okay to not leave after someone cheats on you.
Yeah.
And she's basically like, you have to understand, like, you have broken the trust of that individual, absolutely.
Yeah.
But and you should watch the whole thing because I'm certainly, like, kind of just picking, a few things. But basically she says, if you leaving and saying, like, you cheated on me and we are done, like, cheapens everything else that you and that person have put into it and have done throughout that relationship. And you need to look at it in the totality of, like, the goodness of the relationship versus this particular mistake. And it's not to say you won't be mad or hurt, and it won't be, but, like, getting through that is critical. And so I just bring that up because as we talk about kind of the commitment to marriage, I think immediately people's minds go towards, like, the outs of, like, well, you can mean that, but not this or not that. And I just thought it was an interesting take on a topic that I had really I had very strong opinions on how I would feel about it.
So is it okay if I cheat on you or not okay?
It is not okay.
It is not okay. Okay.
No.
All right. So, but again, like, given that there is, I mean, and there were a few different sources I looked at to pull together sort of this list of concepts. But one thing that occurred in several places was this idea of basically two people knowing that the other person isn't having sex with anybody but them is a like fundamental element. Everybody recognizes, like, yeah, that's a key element of marriage.
Right.
And then the reason is like, why does that matter? And I think that one reason it matters is because the emotions associated with having sex might be threatening, of like, oh, well, now you're like going to leave me. Like our relationship is like, I will be alone if you leave me for somebody else who you're having sex with. I don't want you to have sex with anybody else because I don't want you to leave me because I don't want to be alone. So part of it is we have this pact of you're not allowed to fall in love with anybody else. And the way we limit that is you're not allowed to fool around with anybody else.
Right.
Yeah. But then that's just like level one, right? Like then level two is, well, because we're going to have kids, both people want to know, I don't want to be left with these kids and you run out on me. And so, again, like, you can't go anywhere else because I'm the only one you're allowed to have sex with. So nobody's going to be like, yeah, I guess I'll just like never have sex again so I don't have to raise these kids. People will be like, all right, I guess even though these kids are really obnoxious, I'm going to stick around. It's worth it.
Sure.
You know? And then the third layer, again, is the, like, particularly you take it back pre-DNA tests, like go back to pre-industrial times. It's like, if you want all my stuff, you want to like live in my house and raise these kids here, I'd at least like to know these are my kids. You're not bringing other people's kids into my house to eat my food and stuff.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Do you think all of that makes sense, or like you're laughing at it, but I can't tell if you're laughing because you think it's wrong, or you're like, no, that's true, but it's just funny.
I mean, I think it makes sense.
Well, because as I usually, whenever I'm like formulating an idea like this in my head, I normally like put out a test balloon on Reddit, and I'll say, hey Reddit, I have this idea. Do we all agree that the reason sexual exclusivity matters to men is because I want to make sure that like all these kids are my kids?
Right.
And I didn't really get a lot of feedback except one person who was vehemently like, that is not the purpose of marriage or sexual exclusivity. That is ridiculous. And then I had this dialogue with this person, found out it was a woman. So I just stopped. I immediately discounted that entirely. So out of a polling sampling size of 1, I'm like, I think that makes sense.
Oh my gosh.
I feel like there's a different angle there though that I'm like, it's like in my mind I have this like nagging feeling of like there's something I'm missing about, like if you think about it as an anthropological or evolutionary thing, like why would you come up with this idea of two people are going to get married, and by marriage we mean, yeah, you're not allowed to have sex with anybody but each other now.
Right.
Why? Like really, like let's devil's advocate that. Why can't we live in a society where like, yeah, you get married and you have kids and you have a family, but like, yeah, everybody still has sex with everybody. It doesn't matter.
I mean, from like the biological or whatever perspective of like, I mean, today's day and age, like I'd like to know, like I'm having sex with you and not getting STDs. So like, there's a.
Yeah, I don't think that's like a good historic reason. I don't think 100 or 500 years ago people were worried so much about like transmission of diseases.
Maybe they should have been.
I'm sure they should have been.
Because they're all dead now. So
that's why. It couldn't be the 500 years. Yeah.
No, I mean, like, I think there's something, you know, that like psychological safety of that commitment. I would maybe at some point say like you're likely to have less children if you're not like if you're sleeping around. You're gonna have, you know, how many like especially, you know, 500 years ago, like
you're trying to reduce the number of children.
I mean, maybe that's like biologically like or a function.
That is interesting. I got to think about that more, the math on that. Well, but again, and actually that does make sense both ways. Like I'm having flashbacks to like Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves with Kevin Costner. Because I was taking it from the man's perspective of like, I, the man in pre-industrial times, whatever, like I want to know these kids are mine. I don't want to be feeding other people's kids.
Yeah.
Step one. Just like I'm like economy of resources.
Right.
But think about it the other way too. Like if you're the woman in that scenario, you're like Lady Robin Hood's mom, what was her name? What was Robin Hood's real name? Lancaster? Something like that. I'm going to cut this. This is bad. Anyway, yeah, like if you're in a pre-industrial arena, the woman also has an interest in the economy of the family resources because she wants to make sure that she and her children are being well taken care of. She can't have her husband having kids all around town that now the estate has to be broken up. So both people benefit from this, like, no. All the kids will be our kids. There will be no kids that are your kids or my kid. Like, they're all our kid. All of the resources that we're sharing as a family, we're keeping, to the team here. I
also think, and I don't know when this became, when this came into factor, but I mean, there's a respect piece of it too, right? Like, it's like, I feel like cheating is one of the most disrespectful and embarrassing things you can do to another person, right? Because from that person's perspective of like, am I not enough? Am I like, is that person, are you more attracted to that person? Are you more, right? Like it's it's like that confirmation, that comfort, that like security of like, you're picking me every day and not, and so I think there's that piece too of like, it's humiliating to be like, but I don't know when that became a thing, right?
Well, I think there's two different pieces to what you just said, though. I think part of it is like your own sort of, it's like self-esteem, but then there's also like your sense of community esteem.
Right.
And they did talk about that in some of the discussions about like why we have weddings. Like you could just have like you and I can just sit down, like we're married now, we signed the contract. But everybody there's like witnesses,
right?
And whatever,
you watch my husband now.
Yeah. And that's the thing is, it's like both people.
You can't pretend you didn't know.
Yeah, it's a mutually assured destruction thing. It's like I promise I will commit to that, and I'm gonna follow through. Right. Prove it to you. I'm gonna make all these people watch me say it.
Right.
They're all and it's gonna be really embarrassing for me if all these people find out that I fell through on that commitment.
It's true.
And so, in addition to like the legal consequences, there's also the social
pressure,
stigma, the fear, the embarrassment of like, I really gotta like, people are gonna think less of me if I mess this up.
They will.
Well, but again, like, and not to rehash the same stuff, but I allude to some of this content in my bonus episode on like generations and how marriage has changed over the last 100 years. But now that we have no fault divorce, it is easier for the government to be like, oh, well, you don't want to be married anymore. That's fine.
Right.
Whereas for all of human history until 50 years ago, they were like, no. You guys agreed to be married.
Right.
Unless somebody can prove to a judge that somebody here did something illegal. In other words, adultery or like refusing to provide sustenance to the other partner or whatever, like something that the state would be like, yeah, you can't do that.
Right.
Now you're allowed to get a divorce. Otherwise, like, no, tough. Figure it out.
Well, what do you think that was why was the state interested in marriages staying together?
Well, I think there's two things. One, again, if you think about it just as a contract, like judges are in the business of enforcing other people's contracts. Like the government doesn't make anybody make contracts, but once you make one, then you can take somebody to court and be like, hey, we had this agreement. This guy broke the rules.
Right.
He was supposed to deliver 100 widgets. He only delivered 50. I wanted to pay me for 50 widgets.
Right.
Similarly, you'd be like, hey, judge, we were supposed to be married. This deadbeat over here won't like put food on the table.
Right.
I want you to make him give me money.
Well, that's why I understand that piece, but it's
enforceable contract.
But like there is, I mean, I would argue that there are other contracts where if both parties mutually agree, hey, we don't want this contract to be in place anymore, and the government's like, okay, but with marriage they were not. Right. They were like, well, tell us why not, and we'll tell you whether we think that's okay. So why would they add that added layer? Does it have to do with?
I think there's two reasons. I think one is the children.
Right.
I think that's the obvious one, right? Because the children have an interest in their parents staying married, even if the children don't know that. But like the state on behalf of the children is like, no. You guys have made a commitment to pool your resources and and your energy and effort and all that.
Right.
It's like to bring these children up. And we, the state, aren't going to let you leave these kids hanging. So I think that's the obvious thing. I think the secondary thing, though, that all of this kind of builds toward is a lot of what we think about with people choosing to get married. And even when we think about people who are like, whether or not they're going to get divorced, and like all the, having kids. We're thinking about like people in their young adult and, sort of prime years or middle-aged years.
Right.
The other thing is, if you think that part of the commitment is like, well, we're in this thing forever, because one, if we have kids, then we're their parents forever,
right.
even if they're adults. But two, if we're saying we're both involved in this like mutual development and enrichment and like helping one another become the best version of ourselves.
Yeah.
Again, you don't want people being like, well, as long as you're still like are thin and look good. But if you're like, if you let yourself go, I'm not that interested in like helping you develop, Right. And so like you want young people to be able to make themselves like, even when I'm old and fat, I want you to still be with me. And I promise, in return, when you're old and fat, I'll still be with you too.
So that's magic.
Yeah. But again, so it's like you have to think, so then if you're the state, you're like, listen, I don't want a bunch of middle-aged and elderly fat people with no support system.
Yeah.
I don't want all these homeless people being kicked out of the house by their better looking, fitter spouse who found somebody younger.
Gosh.
It'd be an eyesore if there were a lot of like old men living on benches because their wives were like, well, there's this tennis instructor.
This has gone so far off track.
Well, but all of that is to say like, no. Like, it's better if we all...
Yeah.
Let us pause for a moment to extend our sincere appreciation to those who make the Mr. Homemaker podcast possible.
This week, we'd like to thank all of our patrons who have supported us through Season 1 and this transition to Season 2, especially Colin, Mary Jo and Paul, and Cassie. Finally, thank you to our entire audience for continuing to listen each week. To help us reach more couples trying to navigate these challenging times, please like, subscribe, and share this podcast with your spouse, relatives, and friends.
The discussion is about to resume. Please take your seats and give your attention.
Like, do you think that there is a case that divorce is justifiable, ever?
No. No. No, I think you can, which is different than separating. You can separate, but you can't remarry.
So you marry some jerk who like decides he's going to like beat you every day, and you're telling that person like you can separate, but you're like still tied to that person. Also, you can never get divorced. Also, you can never remarry.
Right.
That's absurd.
Why?
Because that's not, we don't like relegate someone like, well, that's your lot in life. You made that poor choice.
I think we do that all the time.
No, I think, but in a situation where we don't have to, makes no sense.
No, it would be bad to say like you have to live with the person who's abusing you. I think that would be unacceptable. I'm not saying that. I'm saying, you should separate. You should not. And probably that deadbeat in this hypothetical that you've created who's abusing you, he's on the hook to support you because you're his wife. And you have a right not to be abused. You have a right to not be in that house. And he is obligated to support you.
And that guy's just going to be like, yeah.
Just like we have, that's what alimony is. All you're adding is you get to have a divorce. And then the person who's now being supported by this can also remarry. I'm just taking away that last step. Like, no, you don't get to remarry. But you get to separate. You get to have your own house. He has to pay for you. You just don't get to remarry. Why would you get to remarry?
Because there's a foundation. We just talked about the 6 aspects of love, and that person deserves the opportunity for love just because. I'm saying
Maslow's
that
hierarchy involves love, and belonging is like a need. Yeah. Well, I don't know what to tell you.
This is where I feel like you get into your I'm just gonna call it what it is. Your Republican mindset of
whoa.
There is black
and
there is white, and I'm gonna stick to because in order for it to be my principle, it has to be factual 100% of the time, and so I'm just gonna say ridiculous things so that I can say because this is my point, where it's like there are shades of gray that I
let's put a
think
pin-
need to be acknowledged,
Okay.
and I'm
Let's put a pin in this. Let's. I want to meet you halfway. So let's pause here, and I'm going to see if I can come at it from the other angle. Can you think of any actual or hypothetical, but ideally an actual scenario that you're aware of where somebody got divorced and you think it was for a bad reason? A frivolous reason for which they used to be like, yeah, that's not a good reason to get a divorce.
yeah.
Please elaborate.
Like they just got bored of one another and never really had that much in common and probably shouldn't have gotten married to begin with, but and they're just like, well, it's COVID time.
Let's shake things up.
We'll just kind of fall out. I mean, that, like that's, I think that is from my perspective, and I am not the one in that marriage, but I think that's just kind of ridiculous. Like, well, I was just over it. Like,
yeah.
okay. Because I do think that at that point, then it's like, then what is the commitment of marriage at all? Like,
But you feel like we should just relegate people to a life of boredom with like somebody they don't actually have.
no,
good
because I feel
chemistry
like
with?
that's something you can like get, like, just like get a hobby, man. Like,
And
like,
so I would say
find
to that woman who's living in her own house, get a hobby. Take up knitting or something.
No. I'm saying, like, make an effort to, like, enjoy things together, to find things that you can do. Like, you can figure that out.
Yeah.
But, like, I just think it's very different when it has to do with the, like, safety of an individual and their family to be able to say, like, this is, like, I feel like you void the contract. There's a point at which you void the contract of, you're not even not fulfilling your obligations. You're actually harming someone else.
Yeah.
This is done. This is like a breach, like the most severe breach of contract.
So again, let's put aside the adultery and the abuse.
Yeah.
And we're agreeing boredom. We're trying to figure this out from both ends. Adultery and abuse on one end, we're like, yeah, you're
but you can't, like, if
drawing
you're
a
just
hard
bored,
line.
like,
Boredom, not a good
find a
enough
TV
reason.
show you guys can like together.
So let's keep working our way in. Is there anything on this end other than adultery and abuse that you're like, also another good reason to get a divorce is sometimes he leaves an unfinished beer sitting on a mantle and forgets about it. That's also a good reason.
I mean, the rings on the hardwood furniture, towels left on wooden banisters. It's just...
which end of the...
I mean, it's somewhere in the middle. I'm still working that one out. I mean, like, I think those are probably the two most severe, right?
Yeah.
The only other thing I'm thinking about, and this is just because we were talking about this recently, and it's like, never mind. I'm not gonna go down that road.
Yeah. Retake. Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's kind of where, where I land there. I mean, I think then you start to think about, like, things that harm the family but aren't physical harm, right? Like, the husband is a, like, obsessive gambler and, like, literally gambles away everything, right? Like, I kind of feel like in that case, it'd be really hard to get over, but, like, that's something you can work out, like, to work out together, even though it's terrible because, like, it has, like, ruined your life.
I mean, I kind of think I'd put that in the same thing as, like, I think I'd put that a peg below, but not that far from, like, violence.
Yeah. That's where my line starts to get a little fuzzy, though, because I'm like, it is terrible. It is in many, many cases a disease that, like, they can't control.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like I would be miserable. Like, I would be so
I mean, I guess
angry.
the difference is it just, like, what if it was, like, really compulsive gambling, but it actually wasn't, like, endangering your finances? It was just, like, I just love, like, penny slots. And it's like, I have to hit the penny slots once a day. And it should have just been, like, 50 cents. But it's like, I really take my time about it. It takes up a couple hours.
Yeah.
I really just milk that, just really savoring it daily, 2 hours a day, playing the penny slots.
I mean, I'd say that's a waste of your time.
Oh, yeah,
and
yeah,
you should
yeah.
be
But
investing
again,
in other things, but
But I'm contrasting that with like, no, we can't pay the mortgage. Like, there's no
Right.
groceries because I'm gonna
Right.
gamble. I lost it all on the horses.
Right.
You know.
yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know.
I feel like this is becoming like very anti-man. I feel like we're not coming up with any good like.
I mean, women can be adulterers and cheaters.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Do you want to argue?
You're going to say, do you want to divorce? It's like, wow.
This
His
is
whole
the moment.
podcast.
I'm just setting up this discussion. No.
Been one season in the making.
Do you want to argue on your own behalf
Always.
or on behalf of somebody who's not here but might want to take this position? Yeah, actually, it's not that important for kids to have parents be married.
Okay, so I go back and forth on this, and here's
Because
why.
there's a lot of in sociology and then the legal literature, there's a lot of things about like, no, marriage is important because it is important for kids to have their parents be together.
Right.
But I feel like that's like a bunch of old stuffy people saying that, and I feel like all the hip kids are like, no, it's fine. Like it takes a village, and it doesn't matter. And Murphy Brown.
I mean, I love Murphy Brown. I think that there is certainly, in my mind, a benefit to the security and stability, actual and perceived, by children to have married parents.
Yeah.
Like, I think there is a security and a comfort in like, my parents are married. They're not going anywhere. Like, they are together. They are going to be here for me to protect me and take care of me and provide for me and have a loving family. And we're going to have beautiful holidays together for the rest of our lives. Like, where, you know, all of our children come back to our house and we have one big, beautiful family.
Not to get too specific.
Not to get too specific or misty-eyed. But where I start to question, because I think I've heard this from friends who have had parents that have divorced.
Yeah.
Whereas it was very hard for them to go through when you have two parents that are severely unhappy and a part of this is a choice, right? And choose not to make it work.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's more harmful to the kids of like living in a household of anxiety and frustration and yelling. And so I don't know what the bigger benefit is. Like, I mean, I get like, I know what your answer would be, which is like, hey, you're two grown adult parents, like work it out and don't let your kids feel the, like, but kids do and parents do. And so, you know, like I've heard a lot of people who come from families of divorce say like, honestly, it was so much better for each of them. I will say I have very rarely heard them say like it was better for me. Right. I don't feel like I've heard that as much. Though I think that is an undertone of like, you know, it was better, like it was happier. But I think like all of those people in some way like yearn for their parents to be together. Like they wish that was an option, right? Like so I don't know. So I
You're not coming down hard against the idea that parents being married to each other is a bad thing or a good thing. You're not anti that concept.
No. I think like that's the ideal.
Yeah.
You should have two married parents that stay together and work their issues out, preferably not in front of you.
Yeah.
Like, but I don't know. Like, I there is like the piece of when does it become in the better interest of everybody to like not have a dysfunctional, friction-filled household?
Yeah, again, I think that's like going back to the gambling thing, right? That's like it's a very multifaceted sort of set of considerations. And I do worry about sort of the self-fulfilling prophecy of like, if you have the mindset, like you'll find a way to rationalize. But yeah, I don't want to be totally dismissive of like, yeah, I mean, there have got to be irreconcilably, you know, tense dynamics between spouses that like need to be acknowledged. Like I'm not trying to be like, everybody should just work everything out and everything, like it's just
Yeah.
Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Like, I'm not trying to say that.
Yeah. But I do think that I think there are not enough people in society today saying we should aspire to functional marriages and that divorce is a bad thing. Like, I feel like it's become more like contemporarily like, oh, it's fine. Like, if you want to get divorced, you get divorced. If you don't, and it's like, there's nobody advocating other than like what people would perceive as like stuffy old, members of the good old boys club that are like, oh, we should, meanwhile, half of those guys are cheating on their wives and it's like, it always comes out in the magazines, but, and then everybody rejoices that they're cheating, right? It's just, but to say, I feel like we have gotten to a point where we're like, well, to each his own, to like a crazy extent where we are now not saying like, well, it is better if we can do it to have families stick together. And so I think people are willing to step away for far less severe things. Yeah. Because they're like, whatever, I'm just not happy. We got a divorce. It's like, I think you're right that the like eject lever is easier. And I think this goes back to something we've talked about even from a dating perspective, right? And like the advent of like the online dating and all of that. Yeah. That people it used to be much harder to meet someone and to connect with someone. And therefore, like, you were willing to kind of look past, like, his ears are big and weird, or, right? And so, but now, both through the initial filtering of like, I'm just going to scroll. Oh, that guy's got a weird smile. That guy's got a this. Yeah. But then also once you meet these people, if there's just something that doesn't really work for you, then you're like, well, whatever. I'm just going to go back online and find more people. And tomorrow I'll be on a new date. Right. Whereas that wasn't always the case. And so you were willing to kind of invest yourself more. And I feel like that kind of similarly, like, you're like, well, if I don't want to be married anymore, like, well, I just like find someone new. And in fact, I was talking with a friend about someone who went through this, and like she like had just like made friends with these like this group of women who were all divorced. And it was almost like, well, it's like the cool thing. Like all these people, like they're all having fun, like being like single women. And meanwhile, the reality is all of those women were trying to look for new partners, right? Like, like it's not like they were all just like living their best lady life, but they were, so it's just an interesting, like it's almost like, oh, well, that's what I'm gonna do because everybody else is getting divorced and having a grand old time. And I feel like part of why I like, what we're doing with the podcast and being able to talk is because I think there are people out there that are married and enjoy being married and like don't talk about it enough. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, the other thing you made me think about is, I want to, again, sort of as an alternative or like in place of the perception that like, I'm just saying like, one, nobody has problems, or two, if they have problems, like they shouldn't, they just stop having problems, like just fix it. I do want to, I would wish to get to the bottom of like, why are people having problems? And you and I have sort of speculated in different directions about, like, I think people do have more problems today because of several different things that I'm happy to list. But you've said like, no, I think people have just always been miserable. They just like, I guess I'm just miserable. That's my life. And I think it's more likely that, one, because people were committed to the idea like, no, I'm married, and so I've got to make this work. Right. There's no exit. So I'm not going to like complain about it on my way out the door. I'm going to like, I'm here, so I'm going to stop complaining about it. I'm going to fix it. Right. But I think also, I have this pet hypothesis that like, well, no, people used to have a lot more support, and I think they had a lot more preparation for marriage. One other thing I was thinking about a lot as I was doing that bonus episode and thinking about like how increasing college education has changed society is I think it used to be everybody spent their teens and 20s in their home community with their families and long-standing friends until they found somebody to get married to and move into their own house. But now it's like, no, now we're going to spend 4 or 8 years like away from your family on a campus just full of co-eds with no responsibilities and just like money to burn, just checks are coming in, nothing to spend it on, nowhere to be outside of like a few hours a day in some class. Like, well, I have no, one is it's just, it invites irresponsibility, but two, I think that those are years that you could have been spending watching after your little younger siblings or cousins, or helping your mom or dad, you know, like doing all kinds of things domestically. Even if you yourself are not yet married or have your own children, you're involved in a family structure.
Right.
And now we've said for a couple generations of, no. Use all that time. Just like do your own thing.
Yeah.
Just be a solo operator out there in the world.
Gosh, it was great.
No responsibilities. Well, what that means is once you do get married, you're like, you have years less of training
Right.
than your counterpart did 2 generations ago.
Yeah.
I think that's a huge detriment.
You will never, ever get me to speak ill of my 20s.
You're like living high on the hog with no responsibilities was the best.
It was the best. Like I mean, for a number of reasons. Like, so like all like funny, you know, jokes aside, but seriously, like I am not a person to be like, my 20s were the best. Because like I actually think like everything's the best. Like I love now, and like I think being a mom and a wife and having kids and being on a podcast is the best. And I think I have like the best job. And like I love life.
Okay, so as we talked about, sharing resources, material, financial, emotional resources in the family. The marriage is where that begins, between the spouses sharing resources. And then they extend that to their children, which they know are their children because of the
sexual exclusivity.
Correct. Super romantic.
It is.
Well, the other thing that it affords the opportunity to do once you are in a mutual bond, a commitment, we're in this thing together, you and I, is that it is possible to specialize roles. And to say, for example, on Maslow's hierarchy, when it comes to safety and who's going to make sure that there aren't any bears coming in the tent, one of us will do that.
Worst case scenario, a bear kills you. Go hiking.
So the other person doesn't have to worry about doing that as much because they know, well, there's this person I married. They're committed to keeping me alive.
Right.
And they have accepted responsibility for keeping the bears away.
Mm-hmm. That's the advice I'd give a 28-year-old.
Is what?
Marry someone with skills. Lots of diverse skills.
Related to bears?
Related to, like, you know everything about nature.
That's true. I know everything about nature.
You know, like, you would be our protector in any of those scenarios. You have significant medical skills. You take care of all the medical emergencies in our household.
Yeah. Kristen does not know how to apply a Band-Aid.
No. You are a former barista, so you've got
coffee skills.
Legit coffee skills. Like, I could go on and on. Like, those are like very
Please,
like
I mean, our listeners are desperate to know what other nice things can you say about me.
Yeah, but like, so I'm saying, like, I mean, sometimes I'm scared because I'm like, I don't really have very many tangible skills, but let's not talk about that here. I don't want to remind you of that.
Yeah.
But like,
we're committed, babe. I can't
find
back out of it now.
I'm like, you're a dummy. Find a partner that like has some skills, because like you need to have the person, like, who do people go, like in my house it was my mom. Who do people go to when like something medically is bad? My mom was a nurse, and I was always like, oh my god, when I'm a mom, I'm not a nurse. I don't know what to do. Marry an Eagle Scout / Army vet.
Next thing you know, Band-Aids. Don't have to worry about that anymore, Kristen.
Anyway, so.
No, I mean, I think that's exactly the kind of thing I'm referring to. Now, how about...
What are some of my skills?
Well, let's go back to Maslow's hierarchy. I'm going to go down the list, and you're going to say, is this a me thing or a you thing?
Okay.
Or is it like a no specialization, everybody's responsible for it?
All right.
Air and water.
What?
It's the physiological need. Air and water. You need those. I'd say that's both of us. We share that equally.
Yeah, but if we got in like an apocalypse situation, you'd be in charge of what water was okay to drink and what was not.
That's true. And
your life straw.
Breathe. Yeah.
And whatever I could breathe. Exactly. Like when I see I see a plume in DC and I was like, oh my God, is that like chemical warfare? And you're like, no, it's not the right color. Like it's just, there's a fire down the street. So I appreciate that.
There's a very crude retelling of that story, but yes, that did happen. Okay. How about shelter?
You.
I think that's me too. I think that is my responsibility, is to provide shelter.
Mm-hmm.
Clothing.
Me.
I think that's you thing. Food.
Me.
Yeah.
We tried to share that, but it's coming back to me. Like that's a me thing.
Well, it's back to you. Well, let's put a pin in that. It's a thing. That's a point of friction, but that was not on the agenda for this episode. All right, so that's our physiological needs. Now we're going to get into safety. Security from threats.
You.
And safety from hazards.
You.
And then
we have discussed that if something bad were to happen, you would knock me out and throw me over your shoulder
because you
and
are
carry
a liability
you, which is why we need to get back to the
conscious.
gym, both so I can be skinnier and you can be stronger. Because there's only so far we're getting.
It would be helpful, yeah. All right, the next thing is let's talk love and belonging. How about providing a sense of connection?
Me.
I mean, I think that's both of us. But mostly you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is discipline on here?
Let's keep going. The next one is esteem. So having a sense of agency and self-esteem.
I think both of us.
With regard to each other? Or with the children?
With our children.
Well, all this was... We're talking about marriage, not family right now.
Oh, I was thinking about our kids. Okay, so...
Well, when would that have changed the answers?
I don't know. Continue.
Recognition and respect. Which is as opposed to self-esteem, like feeling the esteem of others.
I mean, I don't know. I just like talked you up pretty big on your podcast. You're welcome.
Good job. Check. Yeah, no, I mean, so I can't help but observe that, like, on Maslow's hierarchy, 5 layers: physiological, safety, love, belonging, esteem, self-actualization. Like the first 2, I think, are all me.
The foundation.
The physiological and safety stuff.
Yeah.
But last week when we talked about, like, the functions and goals of family, you skipped all of that.
What do you mean?
Like, I have you on record saying, oh, before you started talking about Maslow's hierarchy, I meant immediately to, like, love and belonging and, like...
Right,
yeah.
Right. Because I don't have to think about those things. You do them.
That's what...
Thanks for the solid foundation. Upon which I will nurture our children and they will grow into beautiful flowers that are planted in our garden and never fully leave because we want them with us forever.
But then for 10 years, they'll just do whatever they want.
No, oh my gosh, but they're going to come home like all the time. That's why we live where we live, because they're all going to go to school in the New England area. There's a plethora of good choices here. If we lived somewhere else, they'd have to go somewhere else for school. This is strategic in what I have chosen.
You're out of control.
There are more colleges and universities per capita in the city of Boston than there are anywhere in the world. Boom.
Boom.
Boston College, I'm coming for you.
I'm going to clip that. Use that for some kind of drop. In the absence of marriage, if I weren't here and you were raising these 3 children on your own, do you think you would worry about physiological and safety needs more than you do now?
Yes, and I would move back in with my parents.
Say more.
I would not be a mother that lived on my own with my children. I would be too concerned and too stressed.
Did you just tell your mom that if she knocks me off, that you'll move back home?
Yeah. First, I tried to get them to move here because I'd want our kids to stay in their school and be like, you know, have the psychological safety of like being like a consistency in where they are. But like, I would not Like, I would absolutely find, like, I'd either move with my parents or, hey, Joanna and Joe, my sister and brother-in-law.
They got a spare bedroom, yeah, right?
Yeah, like they redid their whole basement just for this scenario. If my other sister beats me there, though, then I'm in trouble. But no, but I think I may have thought about this. Like, what if something were to happen to you? Like,
why?
Because I don't know. I'm just like afraid. You started buying all sorts of life insurance, and I was like, oh gosh, like what if something did happen to you? I'm like, I would 100%. Like, I think family is very important, and like I would move back to where my family is to raise my kids. I would not. I think it is too. I actually think it is too hard in my mind to provide for the entire hierarchy on your own.
Huh. I'm strangely comforted that you feel that way. I kind of thought you'd be like, it'd be fine.
No, I would not be fine. I literally was thinking the other day, I was like, I don't even know how to access half of our accounts and stuff. So
that's the real key. Make sure you don't know the passwords.
Like, there are keys to things
keep me around
somewhere. I don't know.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think I'm going to have a lot more to say about that next week when we talk about... Well, because we talked about family, now we're talking about marriage. The next thing is going to be to talk about what it requires for a man to prepare himself to be a good husband and father.
Ooh.
That 27-year-old who's like, I just wasted a decade. Now I got to start getting serious about being an adult. I'm going to give him a to-do list.
I like it. I can't wait.
But naturally, that to-do list has to build upon, like, based on what successful marriage looks like, which is based on what successful family looks like. Here's what being a successful husband and father looks like. I haven't figured out the answer. Do you already know the answer? Do you want to just, like, take a wild swing at it?
I'm gonna hold my thoughts till next episode.
All right. Well, thank you for joining me.
You're welcome. Can we awkwardly turn towards the camera?
Until next time, happy homemaking. Yeah, we're naturals. Okay.
Thank you so much for attending today's discussion with Mr. Homemaker. Please take this opportunity to subscribe, like, and share this episode with your spouse, relatives, and friends. We further invite you to access complimentary information and resources at our website, mr-homemaker.com. There you will also find links to join the discussion via email or social media. And please, support the Mr. Homemaker podcast and receive merchandise and membership benefits on patreon.com. Until next time, farewell.